Hello.
How are you? I'm Celeste. Nice to meet you.
Hi, this is Rupa. How are you?
Okay. Sorry for the background fan noise. This room doesn't have an air conditioner. So it's like the
It's
one
okay.
it's like the one way to keep it cool-ish, I guess. Hey Grace.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Rupa.
We'll wait a couple of minutes and see if people trickle in. Let's see. It was you that just texted me. Yes. Okay, cool.
Me?
Yeah, I was like, as I was walking upstairs, I heard bing, 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 and I was like, oh, who is that? Okay, Keith. Admit. All right. Okay, what happened to Keith? Hey, Keith. How are you?
Hi, Keith.
Hello, how you doing? Hi,
Good.
Grace.
Do you guys all know each other?
Yeah, Keith, do you know Rupa?
The name sounds
Well,
familiar,
now we
but
know.
yeah. Were you involved in World Eye Day last year? Rupa?
No.
Okay, okay. So it's been a couple years since I've been involved sort of at the local level, so.
It's okay. So we're just saying we're going to wait a couple more minutes just in case anybody else wants to trickle in.
Sure.
And then we'll get started. So today's going to be kind of loose. We have, an agenda. However, it's still like, pretty loose in terms of like what we need to talk about. I want to keep the kickoff close to an hour, just so we're like not overburdened. Because even though there's like a lot of work that this committee needs to do, it's not all going to happen in an hour. So being a little bit realistic about like what we should be doing and how we should be doing it. I just want to kind of like preface with that.
Right. And I'm just checking in, Grace, when we talked, you said I was supposed to be on a committee, and I'm checking that this was the one that you had in mind. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to double check, because if you said, no, Keith, you're supposed to be over there, then I'll go over there. So,
No, this is the one.
okay.
I spoke to Keith and Rupa individually, and you guys both had like a lot of like money-making ideas.
Well, money losing and money making ideas, right? They go hand in hand. So,
Is it you've got to spend money to make money or something weird like that?
Yeah.
I'm not really sure that's true, but
That's what they call investing, right? If you invest in something, you gotta give up some to get some more. What do I do? Don't invest.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that once you have money, you can make more money, but I've never had money, so I'm not quite sure that it's true, right? So,
exactly. I'll take your word for it.
right. That's what other people say. So,
Nice. All right.
I'm not sure. I don't think I had specifically.
So maybe if you dream big, maybe it might happen. Who knows? If you
Yeah.
don't dream, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I feel like I dream big, but weird stuff happens that kind of mediates my dreams. Okay, well, let's just get started. Grace, do you want to kind of, I don't know, like in your private conversations, if you've already given an overview of like what came out of the workshops, or if you just want to like touch on that really quickly as a refresher.
Yeah, let's do a refresher. Because I know that so in mid-June, we had a number of workshops with various people from IAC, Euro IA, and some of the recent World Eye Day organizers. And we talked about like what is it, where do we see World Eye Day going in the future, and what does that mean, and what does it mean for you as organizers to have World Eye Day? What came out of that was that people wanted to have more collaborative, like cross-collaborative events, as well as workshops more content that can be shared. So having like being able to have like a content library that we can actually draw from and have discussions around. But at the same time, they called out the difficulty in terms of getting sponsorships, right? So for them to actually have events and host events, the biggest issue they've had is being able to get sponsors, especially if they're new locations that don't necessarily have an IA presence or UX presence in there, like very well. That in itself is difficult for just UX, but it's doubly hard as IA because nobody knows what IA means. No one tends to agree. And in addition to that, it's also like, well, how do we keep on continuing to offer World IA events as a very free and low cost event for people if we don't have sponsorship? So we've talked about being able to do like scholarships for people. So that if we do scholarships, then that means getting money from companies to sponsor students or early career people to attend IAC or Euro IA, right? So sponsor scholarship program is one thing that we've thought about, right? We've also thought about doing things like a World IA Slam. So kind of took off that idea that we had that has been started in the IA Summit, IA Conference, where they had the IA Slam, then they do a project. We kind of pair people, both students and practitioners, and actually do something. Maybe it's something that we can, coordinate from across the world, all over the world, and then we get an industry partner to help sponsor that event and make that happen, right? And then we also have ideas about, well, what about the local level? Like, what can we do? Can we like get like a store or something where we can all like buy supplies from and buying in bulk instead of buying just for our own events? So there's some like ideas that are thrown out. At the same time, though, the other thing is like, well, there's that in our soul. Like, we also want to do more things like the IA roundtable. Just a recent conversation that we had. This wasn't really part of the workshops, but it's more about like marketing. How do we get our word out there? So Lisa, is there anything that I'm missing from this?
I don't think so. I think you covered it all. So, I mean, I think the larger question here, at least for this committee, is given how much the scope has potentially increased for us as an organization beyond like the individual event for WIAD, which will continue to happen, right? Like, we need to kind of develop like what that larger plan should be in order to make sure that, one, at least the main event continues to happen, and then two, how we begin to scale for these larger things. So for me, like personally, where I think this committee needs to really start to put in energies is, one, starting to build up an individual giving base, and then also starting to scale not just single year, but multi-year sponsorships, either for specific types of things. So like, if you can imagine, hey, you go to a sponsor and be like, can you sponsor very specifically like the IA roundtable for the next 2 years, make this particular financial commitment for it. That way we can, have money in the books, even if they don't give a check, for the full amount right away. We have a contract and we have this idea that revenue will be coming in so that we can continue the programming. So with that said, I think we can kind of transition into agenda item 2, which is, vision setting and like where do we—
Can I ask a quick question? Well, what is the ROI for the company putting in the money? What do they get in return?
So what I would think the ROI would be, this is one of the things that we have to scale in terms of like what we deliver for each prospectus. So the way that I think what we should do is similar to like what I used to do like at Steppenwolf, which is a theater company in Chicago, is this idea that like so like for instance, we would go to Mercedes-Benz, right? And Mercedes-Benz, they always were the sponsor for the Artist Talk. And they were also a sponsor for this more kind of like privatized individual giving event. So what did they get? They were able to have, this was in-person event, right? So for them, it was like, oh, well, we give you like top billing at like on all of the materials that we put out. We also make sure that you're able to like show vehicles at any of these events, because these are people that are giving more than $200,000 a year to the theater. So this is obviously your clientele. We give you access to those people in that way. I think we're gonna have to like envision for ourselves, like what that strategy is gonna be and what size fish we wanna go after, right? So is it gonna be enough to just give them something on the website? I don't think so. I think it'll be something like, hey, we're gonna make sure that you're in all materials like across the globe. We're gonna make sure that you can give like a video introduction that is gonna be shown across the globe. You know, we'll help you like create these kinds of deliverables and localize them. You know, start to think a little bit broader.
Right, right. I think that would be the first question they would ask, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
Why
gonna
do we
be the
invest?
first
Why do you sponsor this? What do we get?
Yeah, and so I mean, I think the big thing, and we had a prospectus last year and it was a good prospectus, but I think this year the big challenge will be like this committee being like, okay, we have these 4 major initiatives that we want. In order of priority, it's expanding World IA Day, at least for me, right? The IA roundtable, because that becomes like a continuous quarterly engagement with people outside of the IA field, right? And then the other things around like conference and slam. But at least those 2, for me personally, I mean, we should decide as a committee what we want to do, but for me personally, those 2 are the top ones that we seek funding for in the next 2 years, and we figure out very precisely how we want to get it funded. I mean, I feel like what we could do on something like IA Roundtable is we try to really leverage a larger sponsor to be like, well, you know, we don't, maybe if we get in kind, you know, it's like an in kind for like global, like telecommunication or something, right? So that everybody has the ability to do a webinar, right? Like something really big, but then it becomes like every time that we are doing an event, every time that we tweet out something, you know, regarding this kind of event, we definitely ping that sponsor, you know, so that it
So you
becomes
mean like a webinar also?
yeah.
Okay.
But we need to decide as a committee how we want to address that. And also if like, it becomes one of those things where it's like, well, maybe in the next 2 years, it really isn't feasible to think about scholarships, but that might be something that we build out through individual giving as part of a larger thing. Envision just recently put out an RFP for grants, and Grace was looking at that. You know, one of the things that grant makers are going to want to look at is an individual giving base and a history of individual giving. So, you know, we're going to need to start thinking about like, well, you know, is this going to be individual giving for operations? Is this individual giving? Maybe we think about individual giving as the focus for scholarships to conferences this year. Those are the kinds of things that we need to discuss in terms of like the vision for where we want to go financially.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So with that said, because I just spoke a lot, where does the committee want to go, and like what kinds of priorities do we want to set for the upcoming year and realistically for the next 3 years?
I think we need to brainstorm more for more ideas.
Okay.
So the more we discuss, the more ideas we can come up with, and those would be the revenue streams. May not be in the next 3 months, but maybe down the road, right?
Okay.
So we can prioritize, okay, this looks kind of, yes, we can initiate this maybe in the next 6 months. Maybe this is a little too big. Maybe 2 years down the road or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. So do you, like Keith, Rupa, Grace, what sorts of ideas are you thinking about in terms of fundraising and like other types of development for the org?
Yeah, for me, the challenge, again, I haven't been involved to figure out like who's sponsored World IA Day and the IA conference sort of at a national global level and who's sponsored it locally. When we did things in Michigan for World IA Day, it was easy because we had the understanding group. They signed up to be a sponsor right away without us even asking. But it's the other ones were a little bit harder to get locally. To me, the challenge, again, without being involved in it, I'm guessing that a challenge would be that, you know, UX is hot and IA is not, right? That's, I'm not saying that's right, but that's the way it is, right? So again, if you knocked on Adobe's door, which we did early on for World IA Day, you know, they like donated copies of Adobe, whatever Adobe software they did at the time, right? But if you say, you know, we've got 500 user experience people all gathered around the world or whatever the number is, they'll give you some money. But if you say, well, it's World IA Day and, you know, we have people interested in information architecture, then it's a little bit harder sell, right? So yeah, so I'm just not sure in the past, like where, when we say information architecture, where's the, you know, where's the core sponsors that we're going to have a faster conversation with, and then other ones where we're going to have a longer conversation with them.
Okay.
So
wait, Grace has opened up a board. Grace, do you want to just kind of drive it and I'll just show it on the screen? Or do you want me to drive it?
Or we could just join it separately. And
you guys can all join it separately.
Okay.
And watch. We'll watch each other. I've
We'll
got a big enough screen.
Really.
Yeah, I
combobulated. Okay.
Yeah, I can split my screen and still see everybody. So, but.
Okay.
So I think this idea of doing more donor research is like one of the things that I've been, you know, like when I first took this role, I was like, oh, what kind of donor histories do we have?
Right.
So that's one of the big items that needs to happen, you know, basically very, very soon, is we need to go back through and reconstruct some level of donor history, and we need to reconstruct it across locations. So in other words, rather than thinking about it like, oh, let's just go after Adobe locally, because it's so large, you need to be like, if Adobe's given at all, if they've given to like individually 6 different locations and different amounts, start to think about like going back with some sort of prospectus that says, hey, thank you so much for giving X collective amount.
Right.
We'd like to give you the opportunity to increase your level of impact to World IA Day and the UX community at large with a gift of this much that will give you this kind of presence, right?
Right.
And right now we can't necessarily do that. We have the history for global sponsorship, but we don't have it for local, but we actually need to basically do some sort of intersectionality around what that is.
Right.
So yeah, that's something I have on my to-do list.
Okay. Yeah. That's just for me, like not having paid attention. I just remember from the first couple of years that, you know, Dan Klein and other people took care of that thing, and like magic happened, and they had enough money, and we pulled it off, right? But if we want to do more than just scrounge up enough money to put on one World IA Day event, then we're going to have to do a lot more. Door knocking, right? We're going to have to be like probably knocking on doors all year round rather than just knocking on doors saying, would you like to invest in next year's World IA Day, right? Like you said, multi-year kind of things. So
definitely.
So these are all the sponsors at the global level, but this doesn't indicate like what kind of sponsorship. So these are all, it can be a mix of in-kind and monetary.
Right. Yeah. So I imagine Rosenfeld Media is, they give us a discount coupon kind of thing. And that's like, that's a no brainer. If you fill out a form, it'll happen, right? It takes like 15 minutes each year or something. But that also means that we could go to Lou and we could ask for more, right? That's his template. Right. But again, if I said, okay, I'm going to talk to like Lou tomorrow morning or whatever for something else, right? And it'd be like, okay, Lou, it's time to step up and do more now. Thank you for the discount. But that's what you give everybody. You know, it's time for you to give more, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think this is given everything that's going on in the world right now, this is definitely like the year, as unusual as it sounds, to go big. Because it is, I mean, we're having so many conversations about like where our field and where other fields touch, right? So being able to be like, hey, we literally are an organization that is about broadening that scope and making sure that your presence is felt. So yeah, definitely. Okay, so what else do we have in here in terms of brainstorming ideas?
Going back to Miro.
So yeah, let me zoom back out. Okay. Dun, dun.
I'm gonna go into this mural board later. I'm just gonna scribble down notes for now because that's just an easier way for me to work.
Rupa, if you want to join the Miro board, the link is in the chat.
Okay, so how do I do that? How do I?
Okay, so doing donor history stuff. The other thing I'd like to start thinking about, since we are already starting to think about like a content library and things like that, is instead of annual gifts, starting to get more into, you know, smaller monthly gifts. In other words, trying to build a base where it's like, okay, I might be a student and I don't have very much money, but this organization and what it provides is important to me, so I'm willing to give $5 a month, right? So starting to think about impact in numbers rather than amounts. So something like just starting to think about an individual giving that way as well. But then the other thing I was telling Grace yesterday that is like a big thing that I'd like to accomplish is companies that have matching programs, we need to do better at tracking what those matching programs are and making sure that people who participate in WIAD know that they have a matching program that they can be potentially giving to at an organizational level. So even if they're giving that $5 and they match it, that's $10 a month for us. If they want to give more, I mean, we need to kind of think a little bit broader that way and capture that kind of information. But I'm interested in hearing what sorts of ideas this committee has around individual gifts.
So I think a little bit more context around the individual or the matching program.
Okay.
So one of the locations, I think it was Seattle this year, her company, I think it was Microsoft or something, they had a matching program. And then based on how many hours that she had volunteered as an organizer, they were able to create an actual number, an actual amount tied to that. And then that amount was then donated, contributed to the location, and then some portion, and then she also agreed to donate some portion of that percentage to the Global World IAD for operations. So that does help a lot. I think there was like a couple $100 that came out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to me it seems like at the individual level, donations are okay, but it's probably more like, you know, like attendee fees or, you know, like webinar fees or something like that. It just seems to be a little bit more sense, because then, you know, they give us some money and they get something back that same day, right? Sort of thing, Rich, which again, I know we're trying to keep it free and everything else, but that to me at the individual level, again, without doing some more research, talking to folks, that's my guess, is that like they're willing to pay like, you know, $10 for a webinar, knowing that it's really just a way to donate, right? But they're you know, they're donating tied to some activity.
Yeah.
And again, it could be, again, Zoom call with Lou Rosenfeld, fine, $10, right? Or whatever, right? So there's lots of those little things that we could that we could do. And again, for some parts of our audience, if it costs more than $0, then they're just out, right? What else?
Rupa, what do you think?
Well, the webinar, the way I'm thinking, how do we make this more visible before we charge money for the webinars? How do we attract people to pay? Unless we have very big names.
Yeah, that's it, right. It's sort of like it's sort of like the curse of a meetup, right? When you do a meetup and it starts out free, I've talked to meetup organizers like, well, this is a lot of work. I want to start charging $10 each or whatever. And some of them do, and their community supports it. And other ones, everybody leaves in droves to some other free meetup, right? So, right. But yeah, I mean, what's the level of quality that it has to be for somebody to pay $10, right? For an hour.
I was thinking if we can make the webinars free, but it is like NPR, we can say, this webinar is sponsored by Adobe or Microsoft or whoever it is.
Yeah. And it could be a series of sponsors, right?
Right. Yeah.
A series of sponsors. It could even be like a series of corporate sponsors and like large individual donors. And we can start to think like, oh, like this was sponsored by like Adobe and Tug, right? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
so 15 minutes or so, we take a break, and then once again, or half an hour, depending how long it goes, and say, well, this section is sponsored by so-and-so or something like that.
So I follow this poetry podcast that it's essentially a poetry podcast for people who are professional poets who want to talk about the art of craft with other poets, which is kind of like the content that we're talking about, right? Where it's like, here's some IA people who want to talk about IA stuff with other IA people in a community of IAs. But also you all are welcome to join in on this conversation. The reason I bring this up is like they have an interesting model and that the content is free. So it's like the podcast itself is free.
Yeah, podcast is a great idea.
Yeah, but like the additional content that goes with that podcast. So like sometimes they'll like mention in the podcast, like, oh my gosh, I'm like so happy that like you read that piece to me or whatever, but like they won't read it as part of the podcast, right? They'll like deliberately cut out pieces of content. And so like that specialty content becomes part of what you get for being a sustaining member of this community, right? So like originally I started out at like my little $5 level, and then like I was like quickly convinced that I should really be at like a $20 a month level, because if I wanted like to see that special Kaveh Akbar poem that hasn't been published anywhere that just got mentioned, you know, and like have him discuss that with Rachel, then obviously I need to pay the $20 a month, right? So they've done a really good job at creating a model for people who don't have a lot of money, because poets really don't have any money whatsoever, and like making it into like this sustainable business model. And so I think we can actually do like a combination of like maybe paid types of content, like additional paid types of content. So maybe it's like the webinar is free, but if you want the one-on-one, you have to be a sustaining member.
Right.
Right? Something like that, where it's like incentivized that you want to do that. And if you're not a sustaining member, then like maybe you didn't do your sustaining membership for $5 a month, but you just want this one shot opportunity, then it's going to be like a $20 for that intimate setting where you can ask questions in the webinar, get all this additional extra content that's been prepared by the speaker, you know, something like that. So that way we can maintain.
The other thing I was thinking about was if, let us say, we use something like Zoom, right?
Mhm.
In Zoom, you can change the background. So the background can be a picture of Microsoft logo or something like that. For especially the people who are, who would be, what do you say, who would be running the webinar. That is another thing.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking was, if we have certificates there, some of us, we can teach some courses, information architecture.
That would be good too. Yeah. Because that's something that like it isn't necessarily content. It's like here's an opportunity to go deep dive or even just get an introduction.
Right.
So are you seeing that as like content that would be live where people could like engage with it further on Discord, or something that's like recorded and then maybe there's like a closed channel on Discord where people can then...
It can be both. It can be both.
Okay.
It can be both. The thing about recorded is you cannot ask, it's not interactive, it's linear.
Yes.
But if it is live, then somebody can raise their hand, right, using Zoom or something like that. And then, depending, of course, how many students or how many people are there, then the instructor can stop and then take the question or answer the question.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I didn't go to the IA conference online, but didn't they try where they recorded, right? You could record the talk ahead of time and then you can actually have the speaker available while it's playing, right? And so you can do this weird combination of it's sort of live, you know, the content itself was recorded so you can do it over and over again without much cost. And then you just have the speaker over there in the chat session or whatever, right? Which in essence could actually be better. It could be more intimate. But
Yeah.
again, I don't know if that actually works. I just heard that that's what they tried, right? So.
I mean, did it work, Grace?
Yeah, it worked. I think it was a little confusing because like in each channel there are a lot of things going on as well, because like each track had one channel, and then if they had multiple speakers on the same track, then you can get a little bit messy. But I think, okay, so Keith, you also helped volunteer with the 24 hours of UX, right? And they also had a very similar format too, except, you know, it's all live. And then after they do the talk, they go into a separate, like a Q&A place where they do that. So I also recently attended the Design and Content Conference that's in Vancouver. And they had these pre-recorded talks, but then once, and it's being streamed so that everyone can see at the same time. But then afterwards, they would bring in the speaker and they would do live Q&A. And then, of course, you would have to go to Slack or whatever to have those Q&As. Like you can post questions on there and then they would answer it in the channel and then also live on Zoom.
Right. So again, I think there's lots around content, right, in various forms, right? So it's the content for World Eye Day itself, but then it could be, right, the content for things leading up to it, which is sort of like marketing kind of content, like podcasts could be. And then, yeah, probably the surefire way to make money right now is what I would call professional development type things and training things, right? Because because that's a lot of folks are learning. There's a lot of folks that want to get into the field. There's a lot of folks that are trying to learn new things, right? So that seems to be one business model to try, would be, you know, sort of like be a content, right? If we want to make more money, we just generate more content, right? There's sort of like, there's at least that relationship, right? If we need more money, then we put on more webinars and we get more sponsors, right? That kind of thing. So there's at least, we put some effort in and we get some money coming out, right? Exactly. Like, how much work is it to do, you know, Peter Morville webinar that then 50 people sign up for and everybody pays $100 and we make 5,000, we give Peter 2,000 and we make 3,000 or whatever. I don't know what the math is, right? But we could sort of work on the business model around, you know, half-day workshops or whatever kind of thing. That, you know, that's just my guess at what the sort of the unit of training would be.
Yeah.
We have access to content that's pre-recorded from IAC or stuff that we've done in the past that we can just test this with.
Right.
Right. So maybe so before we decide to go live, right? Like let's just kind of get like a feel for, you know, hey, if we gave you this content at like a low cost, like would you jump for it, right? So that we can just get a feel for the market.
Mm-hmm. So Anita did a webinar.
I attended that, yeah.
Yeah, and so did Rupa too. Yeah, so I think we can probably ask Anita if she wants to, she's okay with us using that as a pilot.
Okay.
Maybe we could do more marketing promotion around it to see if we can gather more people to get to join.
Yeah, I mean, I want to, I guess I'm trying to say is I want us to kind of test drive like what that could look like, even if it's like really small, before we start going out and saying like, hey, can you like, you know, do this, like a bunch of different people provide all these different webinars that we will have to turn around and pay them for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because I don't want them, worst case scenario is they show up to a webinar that like we've promised a certain amount and like we're basically, you know, in the red.
Right.
Or,
yes.
Or like,
yes.
Best case scenario, or like a best case, worst case scenario, like a lot of people show up and we're not prepared for handling the amount of like questions. I only say that because I just finished a 2 workshop session with Alexander Chi, of which there were 300 attendees in that workshop.
Right.
And it was a writing workshop, and it was really difficult to attend a writing workshop with 300 other people. They did not anticipate, I don't know how they did not anticipate that 300 people would not want to have a writing workshop with Alexander Chi, who's like amazing. He writes about like autobiographical fiction, but like, yeah, it was like nuts. So I can also imagine if we're like, oh, hey, Peter Morville's gonna give this like webinar for like $30, that we could have that same problem of like 500 people showing up and then like, you know, Peter pulling like what Alexander did in that workshop and being like, hey, there's 100 of you that have questions. I'm going to skim these and try to like make sense of it, because it became a moderation issue.
Right. Yeah.
But we can cap it though. We can say the first 50 people or 100 people.
Right. Right. And again, that could be a marketing thing that says like only 30 people are going to be allowed in, kind of thing, right? Because, right, or whatever. So yeah. So I think, but again, like putting on half-day workshops to make money, that's a lot of work, right? Right. And so like that alone is a lot of work. And my guess is we would make some money that way that could then help with other things. But that's, you know, if, you know, it would be pretty easy to scope that as like, oh, that's a full-time job, right? That's, you know, but I think that's, if we're looking at possible revenue streams, I see, you know, getting individuals to donate. I see we should try it. I'm not sure how big that one would be. Definitely companies sponsoring things that we do goes hand in hand with it. So again, if we do a Peter Morville webinar sponsored by Rosenfeld Media, then, you know, we can actually make money off of the attendees and off of, you know, whose logos on the background behind Peter for 4 straight hours.
Instead of 4 hours straight, can we split it in two days or 3, something like that?
Yeah, I was just using that as an example to think of, like, versus planning a 5-day conference, right? A 5-day conference of multiple speakers is a big thing, but some sort of half-day-ish thing that's very, very focused, right? Again, I think people will pay a certain amount of money for that sort of thing, and they can get their boss to pay for it versus just asking them for other things. So I think there's that. I'm trying to think of, like, you know, when I've done other events, right? If you can promise or sort of show that you're going to have a whole bunch of people there looking for jobs, for example,
Mhm.
right? Then you can get hiring, right? You can get hiring managers and other people there, right? You can just sort of tap into the, what I would call the meat market of employment, right? Right.
Yeah.
And so you know, at a local level in Detroit, we can get Vitamin T to sponsor anything because they know that we will have 100 people show up. And it's going to be worth their money, because again, that's what they do for a living. They have a budget for that. So like they actually encourage us, guys, can you put on some more events in Detroit, because we got more money that we want to spend, right? And so, but again, like I haven't sort of, you know, so there's the huge UX job market. But again, if we're going to be focused a little bit more on information architecture, then like where are the information architecture jobs, and where are the folks that are hiring for them? If we, you know, those would be the ones that would have an easier sell versus, right, here's 500 UX people, but over here, here's 50 IAs, right? And who would rather be at the 50 IA event than the 500 UX person event?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
So career fairs.
And I mean, I think
From
Yeah.
my experience, if I can add my 2 cents here,
okay.
many people are just not aware. This is what I was sharing with Grace. They are not aware about the importance of IA within this umbrella of UX.
or even that IA exists outside of the umbrella of UX, right? So right, so yes. And so part is again, if there's not a lot of jobs in it yet, then we're more on the educational side, right? So then what kind of educational sessions would we have? Do we need to start talking to HR people to get them to understand it? Or is it CIOs, or is it CTOs? I'm not sure, right? So where do we go?
The other thing, what we can think about, since we are brainstorming, how we can get out of this, not just constrain ourselves to this mobile apps and websites. If we can go beyond this technology thing, how can information architecture be used or applied in an office situation when there are so many different ways of communication or communicating, or technology? How can it be organized? How can it be structured? So if we can think about that, then we can apply it. More people would be willing to buy into this.
Mhm.
Right. And yeah, those are things that we've been talking about at the Information Architecture Roundtable at the I conference over the years, right? So there's definitely some folks that have been making that case of information architecture is much broader than just figuring out the links at the top of web pages.
Yeah, I know one person was a Jorge who always does the Disney parks,
Right.
how they organize that. And there's also urban planning. Chris Chandler's, he had once did a talk about urban planning and how he got into IA through that.
Right.
So I think there's content there. It's just not, you know, not outside of the IA roundtable.
Right. Right. So again, that could be, again, part of it is like having folks like Dan Klein and Andrea Resmini and Jorge talking about information architecture at this higher level kind of thing, right? And again, if we had the half-day workshops on that versus the normal half-day workshops that you're going to find already about information architecture, which is just talking about it in terms of tagging and links and so on, right?
Mhm.
So if we do that one, then that could do two purposes. One is we would have people signing up for that, because that's new content that isn't just available at the average UX conference, right?
Yeah.
And then the folks that do come get a little bit more educated. And then again, we could have special sessions around it. We could have Jorge do one session for a more general audience and another one that's targeted information architecture for CIOs. I'm just going to make it up, right? But it's just going to be, everything the CIO needs in order to not get fired next year or whatever, right? Right. And it's Jorge talking about IA. And then again, we got to beat the bushes and get the CIOs there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is not probably, if we look through all the people that have ever attended a World IA Day, there probably aren't a lot of CIOs on the list. Maybe there are, but.
But I mean, to the larger point, and I think I brought this up in a board meeting because I'm doing a lot of writing because I am presently unemployed, and so I'm like, I'm gonna freaking take writing workshops because
Right.
what the hell not? but like one of like the recent workshops that I took, like one of the exercises we did in a poetry workshop was like an IA exercise. And it was like kind of mind blowing because here was like all these poets being like, oh, I never thought of that. And I'm sitting there thinking like, oh my God, I'm freaking taking this stupid workshop. So I don't have to think about like work related things.
Right.
However, it is interesting to think about like the idea that there's like a lot of people that are working in experiential design fields where it's not necessarily digitally focused, right? Where they might be working, like a good example of that would be like ASU's School of Experiential Design that actually is doing like IA work around like spaces that take place that like might be digital, but like you're like literally walking through them as like part of like these larger installations that help you solve problems, right? So starting to maybe reach out to those kinds of people that can also help us stay abreast to how people are using these different types of methodologies in ways that maybe we haven't even like considered because we're not talking to people in those fields because we're so focused on like the digital. I think like the other thing too around this content, and Grace, I think it was Anita that was in charge of all of our social media stuff, right? And all of our content stuff. Do we need to be talking to Anita and anybody on her committee before making plans around content? Or can we just ad hoc spearhead that on our own? In part because so much of it is dependent on our strategy.
Yeah, I think it's okay to ad hoc and do it on our own because she doesn't really have a committee. She doesn't have a team
Okay.
right now. And right now she's also focused on San Francisco stuff. So I think as long as we ping her in the advisory channels to let her know that we're doing this, she's probably cool with it. So that way she knows where who's doing it, the marketing.
Okay. All right, so time check, we're at 7:48. I think where we're going as a committee is that we actually need to, if we are gonna go for a content-driven strategy for the finance, then the first thing we need to do is figure out what content we're gonna be producing and at what level, and like, what is the cost of producing that content potentially. And so that way when we go to people and ask for it, so let's say for instance, we go for a large workshop, it's like we estimate that this will be X amount of your time plus, you know, whatever you take to plan. We anticipate that like a minimum goal will be met at this, and that like your payment, your compensation will be X, unless you choose to like donate your time, right? But also
it has to be pro bono. Initially. I think it would be very difficult to promise unless we know how many people are going to sign up.
Yeah.
I think here's the thing. What I want to discourage, so people who already have enough of a following, I'm fine asking them for pro bono. But there's other people in our field that don't get as much play and clearly don't get the paychecks that some people get, that definitely deserve to be paid for their content and like uplifted in a way that we don't ask them to take on labor that's for free, right? And I think there's different ways that we can strategize around that. I think, you know, if we're gonna definitely decide that we're gonna ask everybody pro bono, maybe like out of the gate, we're doing a lot more like microcasting. So like smaller, you can think of like things like on Instagram or even on Twitter, right? Where it's like, hey, this is like a lesson in 5 minutes. This is a lesson in like 15 minutes. Like, how do you break up that content so that it's not like, oh, hey, you basically gave us $1,000 worth of your time, right? And then like got nothing out of it. Because for some people, $1,000 worth of their time is like $1,000 that like they really actually need. I just want to be cognizant of like the differences in our field.
Or how about this idea? So let us say we can tell those people that who would be doing these webinars, okay, if it's successful, then you get X amount of dollars.
Okay.
Something like that.
Yeah, but we still need to itemize like what that would be, right? Those minimum thresholds, and have them sign off on that and be agreeable to it.
Right, right.
Yeah. And again, it might be a percentage of it, right? That says, if we get 50 people signing up and it's $50 each, then we'll give you a certain percent. If only 10 people sign up, we have to decide whether we cancel it or whether, the formula changes a little bit. I think, right? So part is we could sort of play the community service card that says like Jorge, right? Jorge could do a webinar all by himself and just, he could do all the work and organize it himself. He could partner with somebody else like Rosenfeld Media, whatever the other business is. But if World IA Day came to him and said, would you do it with us, knowing that some of the money that passes through the pipe goes to a good cause, right? He would be more likely to say yes, right? And especially if he already had it done for for some commercial endeavor, that it's not that much extra work, right? We sort of get the second ones versus he has to do it from scratch. And again, we could say and if you want to, here's the $500, thank you, Jorge. But down at the bottom is a little checkbox where he donates it back, right? So again, he could do it for the money, or he could then just pass it back. But we could say we paid Jorge $500, and instead of buying beer, he decided to give it back to us. Okay, that's fine, right?
A lot of beer.
Right. So I think we could do that one, right? Versus the average, if I just called Jorge that says, Jorge, I want to put on a webinar for you, and our goal is to make $5,000. Let's just do it for the money kind of thing, right? He would probably be, he would do it if he needed to, but I think a lot of folks would be open to partnering with us to do it because they want to support the cause, right? So I think that could be part of the business model, but yes. So I was trying to think as we were talking, some sort of generating content is one way to do money, right? But is that, and we could partner with, we could tie in some sponsorship things, right? But sponsorship could also just come into doing free events that are easier to organize and less work, right? Like a podcast series or whatever, right? That sort of thing. But I was trying to think what other ways could we make money without tying them to events, right? And I haven't been able to come up with anything, right? Or some other form of content, right? It's well, somebody could write an article, and then you have to, we Abby does a new version of her book or whatever, and then she shares the proceeds with us. So I'm trying to think of other ways to make money besides content somehow being in it, either as easy to do content, like just a 1 hour webinar where Jorge just shows up and we do an ask me anything kind of thing, right? That's sort of an easy kind of content versus the half-day webinar type thing versus then the World IA Day itself, which is the big enchilada, right?
I have an idea, just a thought. One thing is there are a lot of IT companies all over the country. And so we ask them for donation, but we can say, okay, we can do some sort of training for your guys in IA. Something. So you get something in return, not just write a check.
Right.
The other thing is a mobile app, and where some of us publish articles. Most of them are free. Some of them, they have to click on something and pay money, let us say $1 or 50 cents to access a specific article.
So articles behind a paywall,
Yeah.
like ACM journals.
Right.
Yeah, short articles, yeah.
Yeah. So yes, yeah. So again, that's still right. Other forms of content, I think, right? There's definitely a gap in terms of like there really isn't an active journal of IA, right? There's lots of sort of publishing stuff in the IA field that's a gap, right? So like again, somebody has to go to 20 different places to read 20 different IA articles scattered across 20 different UX magazines, right? So again, right? It's like having the IA magazine, right? So that's another
Everything
thing
in
that you
one
could
place.
do, and you
I
could
think
sell
that's the
at.
thing.
Pardon?
Everything in one place.
Right. So the fact of that is it makes it more convenient. Some people, that would add some value that some people could pay for. It could be used for marketing and other stuff. So, but again, that's also the content driven way, right? So again, maybe it seems like the webinars are a little bit easier, right? Because you sort of do one and then 3 weeks later you can do another one and another one and another one. The articles are nice because they more stand the test of time, right? For long-term stuff, right? Once you can get stuff published in readable form, then that could actually pay off over 5 or 6 years as people keep going into it.
But in the mobile app though, we can have text articles. We can also put this recorded webinars in that as well. So
Sure.
if somebody is taking the train, they can either read or they can watch.
Sure. Yeah. Again, we could integrate video into our text articles and things like that, right? So it could be, right? It could be Jorge writing an article with Jorge talking about it, and then a chance to buy money to hear Jorge even more.
Right.
But again, to me, it's like this content, but this is, it's hard enough to do content one day of the year, right? To do content 365 days of the year. This would be awesome if we could pull it off. But, so to me, it's like the roadmap. It's like someday we would like to do that. Well, what's the 5-year plan kind of thing, right? So.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so we have 3 minutes left. Quick question for Grace. Do we, so with IA Roundtable coming up and that like already being on the books, that's something that we need to find a sponsor for like yesterday. Do we have a theme for it already? Because I feel like the next thing we need to plan for, in addition to whatever this like content plan and like what the stratification is going to be around like our goals for that, financially and in terms of like how much, we actually have available to spend. We need to know what is going on with the IA Roundtable and like approximately, what they're thinking of doing. And if that's something that it sounds like it's something that we need to touch in some way to plan for.
Yeah, so I haven't actually talked to the IA Roundtable yet. This is just an idea that I talked to with Rosmini about last week. So, and at the same time, the IA Roundtable is supposed to coincide with the publication of the Journal of IA stuff that's going out in late September. So we're still thinking about IA Roundtable something in October that has to do with the things that are being published in the Journal of IA stuff that's coming out then. I don't know. Well, Rupa, you're actually part of that.
Yes.
Journal of IA stuff, so you kind of have an idea what they're talking about, right?
Well, we had a meeting maybe 2 weeks ago. So we've been thinking about 2 publications per year. So we're still kind of in the works. So nothing decided as yet.
Okay. All right. So with that said, we have 1 minute left. Okay. Let's pick out a next date. I want to make sure that we have some homework before we meet again.
Sure.
So let's be prepared to come back with just some sort of like, it doesn't need to be like formalized on a Miro board or anything like that, but just sort of like some sort of formalized scale of like, I feel, like we're going to need to target like this many webinars a year, this type of micro casting, like whatever we're seeing that schemata as, so we can talk very specifically to that. What I'm hearing that I need to do out of this conversation is go back through everything and try to figure out like what our budget was last year so that we can discuss more appropriately what the budget will be for what we want to plan for the upcoming year. And I think those should be like the 2 items that we concentrate on, if that's okay, unless there's anything else you guys want to concentrate
Sounds good.
on. Okay.
Yeah. So for me, I still go back. I do a lot of consulting with startups. And so usually when we have these sort of business model type conversations, I usually just make them do something with the business model canvas, which isn't a quite perfect fit. But again, it helps us write down, like, who do we think is going to be giving us money? Who do we think we're going to be paying money to? And, you know, like, it helps us sort of like, what's the value again for this sort of stuff? So just, and again, we're IAs, we're good at modeling. So I'd like to do just like something very rough that says, like, here's our business model, right? And I use it in quotes because we're not really business. But again, just sort of encapsulates what we talked about. Like, individuals will pay a little bit of money. Companies will be sponsors and paying money or whatever. And there'll be a box, you know, there might be a big box in the middle that just says content, right? And money goes into content or whatever. But just something that sort of represents what we talked about to help us talk about, again, like, where are we trying to make money? And then where's that money going to once we get it? You know, again, IA Roundtable is a place that probably takes our money, but then there could be sponsorship of it, right? So there's a little bit of loop of money around the IA Roundtable. There could be a little bit of a loop of money around half-day webinar, half-day workshops, and things like that.
Okay. So do we want to meet within 2 weeks or 1 week?
I can do either, I think. Well,
Fine. Either
2
way
weeks
is
will be
fine.
harder. I will probably be on vacation in 2 weeks. So the
Okay.
the first week in August, if I chime in, I'll be chiming in from a beach somewhere. So, you know, unless of course the beach gets shut down. So
All right.
So
Yeah,
can we do it at 6:30 your time?
6:30 PST.
Yeah, mine is 10 to 11.
Yes, and I can also do something earlier in the morning. I am not opposed to morning meetings.
That's fine. I mean, 6:30 would be 9:30, so 10:30. So that's okay.
Well, I also want to, well, we could do a poll on what times earlier. So if you guys want to do even early, because I feel like this is cutting down into very late. So it's like 11 p.m. for you guys.
which is not a big deal. Again, it's you
It's fine.
interrupted me watching TV, so this is fine, right? So because that's sort of what my wind down before I go to bed. So so this time is okay for me, but if it's, again, I'm pretty flexible on any given day. I might have a conflict at something, but in general,
But just half an hour, if it is possible. That would be great.
Okay, I am fine with 6:30.
But
unless-
if it is not possible, then it's okay as well. It's okay.
Okay, my only issue with next week is I will be kicking off a study, and I do not know when people are going to be scheduled by recruiters.
That's okay.
So
Let us stick to this time then.
that's my caveat. Even though I was like, should we meet in a week? And now I'm thinking about it. I'm like,
right.
4:30. That might be like, that seems like a time that a recruiter would like schedule a participant. Because of course. But 6:30, I think I can swing. So should we just do next Tuesday at 6:30?
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Grace, should I just put this in the finance committee Discord channel?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll put the same, I'll just duplicate the, what is it? I'll duplicate the invitation, and that way it like generates a new code or whatever, and I'll put that in the finance committee, and that way everybody has it for next Tuesday. And I'll change the time to 6:30.
Okay. The only person I think we're missing in Discord is Rupa. So I'm gonna send you an email with the invite to Discord, and then once I see you in there, I'll add you in.
Yeah, so just go into the finance committee, and then we can start communicating there.
And I need to add Keith.
All right.
Yeah, I found the message in there in Discord. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
but I can't remember if I saw it somewhere else too, but
we're all, I just started like putting it everywhere because I was like,
Okay,
if you're
okay.
interested,
okay,
have
right.
me either.
So yes, I don't remember where I saw it, except I saw it in Discord, and I'm still learning it, so that's about all I can tell you. So, but there is a finances one that I saw. Yeah, I can get to it.
Okay.
Yeah, I need to see if there's like a, what are you considered finance team, right? So
Okay.
Right,
I'll
and
set you guys up. Don't worry. Let me figure this out.
right, and I happened to notice that you had a link to our page about it, and Asha was listed as well as another member.
Yeah, she wanna do. She's more interested in partnerships.
Okay.
So the thing is, like, there were a number of people who had nominated themselves to be part of the global board, and I haven't actually gone through and onboarded everyone yet.
Okay, I was just curious. So
What do you mean by partnerships?
Like, that's a good conversation to have with Asha.
Yeah, I think we just need to be really clear on what those terms are. And honestly, I feel like anybody who's working on development just needs to be on a single committee for development.
Yeah.
It needs to be one cohesive strategy.
Yeah. So I think she needs to be part. I mean, in your committee,
Okay.
but maybe she's focused on certain streams. I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever you guys want to call it.
Okay.
That's how I feel.
We're the coolest bunch of people. We're gonna like make money and stuff. Okay. All right. Okay, so I will go ahead and I will do this. We will I'll post the new invitation in that channel. We're all gonna like over the next week just kind of stew on what we think this model is gonna look like. We'll discuss that, and then hopefully I'll be able to pull stuff together around what our budget was, even if it's only on expenditures, which I feel is gonna be all that I bring back, but hopefully we will be able to actually make a proper budget for the coming year. Sound like a plan?
Sounds great.
Okay, sweet. All right, well, have a nice evening, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Night.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.